Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Cinefile, the podcast celebrating cinema one film at a time. Each week, my co-host Jake Biller and I break down a film, discussing anything from mise en scène to scenes you missed. Today, we talk about Zuzu's Petals. We could also talk about Tom Sawyer. We could talk about so many things because we are talking about It's a Wonderful Life from 1946. This is our final in our Christmas classic series. You see the graphic right there. And this is actually the final Cinefile podcast for the calendar year of 2022. It's been quite a ride so far. We're going to take off the rest of this month in January, and we'll be back in February. But we're here today. We're talking about It's a Wonderful Life. Jake, whose pick was it this week? We both love this movie.
It was my pick.
Okay.
And I thought of no better way to end a Christmas series and end season 2 than with It's a Wonderful Life. You're right, we both love it. This is just such a staple. It's a staple for so many, especially this time of year during the holidays, getting ready for Christmas. Hard to believe that we are less than a week away from Christmas. Santa Claus is putting the last toys on the sleigh, getting ready to take off and everything. But no,
maybe you could put $8,000 in the sleigh for me. That'd be great.
It'd help Uncle Billy.
We'll get to that.
Uncle Billy needs a lot of help.
Yes, he does.
But no, this is just such a classic. It's so endearing and heartfelt. Yes, sappy and idealistic and very kind of wide-eyed optimist. It's painted, I think, kind of with a broad stroke in a number of areas, but it's so endearing. It's so uplifting, really. Being a Friends fan, Phoebe goes on a whole episode tangent about how her mom didn't let her watch the end of sad movies, and so she ended up as an adult watching It's a Wonderful Life, but stopped before the end. And she's like, it should be called It's a Sucky Life. Or something like that. Because this is, it really is like quite a sad and kind of depressing movie for most of it. But really, like the middle, that second act, the middle, really just kind of, you really feel how the years have worn George Bailey down. But it, of course, ends on a hopeful note because it is a wonderful life. But yeah, I just love this so much. I could blather on forever, but
that's kind of why we do this.
But... Yes. I don't know. we love this so much, but I don't know if we really sat down and have a conversation about this movie. I don't think we've even watched it together before.
I don't think we have. We did watch White Christmas, which I still need to watch. Obviously, we're not doing that for the pod this year, but I love that movie so much. I've always wanted to be in that musical as well, the stage production. This is a movie that I knew growing up. My dad, this is one of his favorites. Ironically, so Dad didn't have a lot of DVDs, but he had the 2-disc version of this. And it was like in his living room when he died, which is really interesting that was one of the ones that he wanted to watch. And this movie isn't supposed to be a Christmas movie. It's not necessarily. It wasn't designed as a Christmas movie, but it kind of has taken a journey of its own into becoming a Christmas classic. Obviously, to start off with this idea that it wasn't supposed to be that. This movie, yes, it has the Christmas elements in it, right? This is the day before Christmas, but that's only the third act. Everything else is basically, it's about the Depression. It's about after the war and kind of this struggle between Potter and George Bailey for the town's innocence, if you will. But the reason that it's just so interesting to me that people think that this is a Christmas movie. I think it is a Christmas movie, but I think this actually helps the argument that Die Hard's a Christmas movie.
Yes.
Because the Die Hard wasn't designed as a Christmas movie, but all the events take place around Christmas. That's the crux. That's the catalyst of the story. And for this really starts in media res, in the middle of things, and then we kind of go and we get this whole history of George Bailey, but the central events around this film, I would say, happen. Well, actually it doesn't really have to do with Christmas.
Yeah. Um, it's it's so interesting because like it doesn't have anything to do with or very much to do with Christmas, but yet in a way like it does, I think, because the end of the year, which of course coincides with Christmas. I mean, there is a week between Christmas and the new year. Um, that happens every year. That's how calendars work.
You're kidding.
That's how
Wait, the
math.
calendar's the same every year?
That's how math and calendars work. Um, so I think there's around Christmas, and you have that time of reconnecting with family for a lot of people, and I think we're always kind of nostalgic about the years past and the traditions prior, like we've talked about in this podcast, but also kind of the year coming to a close and what has this year meant for me. And it's kind of, I don't know, for some reason,
It's
Christmas.
reflective.
Oh, yeah, Christmas always kind of starts that kind of, I don't know, it's like a week long, at least for me, a week long reflection on the year of what has this year meant and what do I want to go into the new year with. And I think that's very much where George is at, and his in his headspace, especially when we get to, um, you talk about this being told in media race, like we're dropped in current time, being
Yeah.
Christmas Eve of 1945. Yeah, because this comes out in 46, so it would be 45. I Sure, we're gonna go with that.
Yeah, I was just saying, like,
It's
I don't think
nondescript.
it. Yeah, it's not
It
descript.
doesn't matter. Um, so we start there, and then everything is told really through backstory, but you forget so much of that because we kind of have long breaks in between the angel's narration, kind of
Right.
the summary of George's life and how he got to this point. But if you look at George in the in that Christmas Eve day, it is very ends up very reflective. This latest problem being the misplacing of $8,000. Um, big oops for a building and loan, which like
Yes.
a tangent here, but like a building and loan, I'm like, is it a bank? Is it like a mortgage lender or like a home builder? Like
I
I
feel
don't know.
like it's like a credit union almost.
Yeah, it's like I
Yeah.
can't really. I think you're right. A credit union would probably be an apt comparison, but it's like it's hard because we don't really necessarily have building and loans that I can, or at least not that I'm aware of. Also, peep the Bailey Brothers building and loan shit.
Yeah, I think the idea of this is that compared to the bank and Potter, it's a lower interest rate,
Yeah,
and you're kind of going more on character and the full breadth and depth of what you've been able to do in your life. So
yeah,
it's not purely looking at finances, but looking at all of the different elements, and you're able to. You have a lot more risk, I think, with a building and loan than you do a bank, because you have a lower interest rate, and these people may not be able to pay it back.
yeah.
But from what it sounds like in the movie, they essentially are taking the money that they get from one lender and
Uh-huh.
investing it in the next house, and vice versa is kind of what he made it sound like. But
Right,
yeah, so he's got this building and loan, and the whole theme of this podcast, I actually really haven't even talked to Jake about this, is we're talking about populism today.
right.
And I have pulled up my paper that I did on populism for Dr. West's class, and I realized I quoted his book so much in papers to him, which is he once gave me an award, a special award. He once gave me a signed copy of his own book, which I think is like it's just the most Dr. West thing ever, but it's also kind of pretentious. Um, but essentially, I kind of wanted to read the definition of populism as we kind of are starting here. So, populism is the basic belief held by many people that the superior and majority will of the common man is forever threatened by the usurping, sophisticated, evil few. So, it's its major tenets reflect this definition with such concepts as the celebration of small town America, patriotism, the significance of traditional values, embracing the establishment, and wise and trustworthy leaders. It also has to do with second chances. And so that's what populism is. It was very popular, I guess, pun aside, it was very popular when Frank Capra was making them in the 40s.
Yeah.
And even 1939's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And there's a whole analysis, like there's scene where he has like models of like a bridge and a house that he breaks down, right? George Bailey does.
Yeah.
That when he's looking and saying like, you can play the piano again, like I'm sorry. Behind him is Abraham Lincoln, which is just like another that there's so much to say about that.
Yeah.
But I think the reason why this works as a Christmas film and as something that, you know, you're reflecting over the past year is the idea of second chances and this fight between good and evil, or a good overcoming evil.
Yeah.
I mean, we look at it as 2020 vision, right? Hindsight is 2020. And for George Bailey, that's essentially what this movie is about. Looking back and saying the moment will pass, but who you are does not. Who you are can change, and you can change that, but the moment will pass.
Yeah.
And oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I think, you know, to your point, especially obviously, so this is kind of in the landscape of finances, the world of financial lending and whatnot. The Potter in charge of the bank, and then George, the kind of small town folksy stand up for the small guy building a loan. And this kind of struggle the whole movie about, you know, the takeover of greed and corruption that Potter really represents. And George never has a lot of money. He never has a lavish house. He is tempted by Potter at different times with money to either bail out in a time of crisis or to supposedly better his you know, family's standing and his personal financial situation, right? And so I think here the idea of populism is really applied to, it's not about what you have, but it's about who you are, which I think is a very Christmassy kind of tenet. We get so wrapped up, pun intended, in the gifts of the season, and I think that's what you really can kind of stress people out is, oh, I have to get a gift for so and so because so and so is going to give me a gift, and I want to make sure I spend the same amount with on Joe from work that he's going to spend on me, and you know, I've got to buy it for, you know, all my cousins and all my siblings and my parents, and do I spend an equal amount on each other because I found this really cool gift that's kind of expensive for mom, but do that mean I have to spend the same amount for dad? All this to say, like, Christmas is inherently very commercialized. Like,
Yes.
Black Friday is called Black Friday for a reason. It's because
Right.
it's the start of the Christmas shopping season and they're commercializing the holiday. They literally invented a quasi holiday in kind of American culture. I mean, how many people also get Black Friday off as a holiday, right? You know, they've
Right.
kind of American greed and capitalism have kind of created, you know, this big idea of commercializing Christmas. And so I think a lot of the people, I shouldn't even say, well, yes, the people, but also like the movies that try to stand up to be like, no, this isn't what Christmas is about. It's about, you know, if you're a Christian, it's about, you know, the coming of Christ and the ultimate gift that can't be paid for.
Right.
Or even just, you know, on a more secular level, it's about, you know, spending time with others, with your family, those you care about, and showing that you care. Not necessarily through gifts. I mean, that's definitely a part of it, but it's not about the gift. It's about what it means and the relationship you've built between those people, right? And so I think that's very much that lens can be applied then to how we look at this movie, because it's very much that struggle between money, commercialism, and wealth, and good character standing up for what's right, doing the right thing, even if that doesn't get you ahead in business, right? And that's George's whole life. And he feels he becomes very he gets to the point where he wishes he's never been born, because he feels as though, because he has not amounted to anything financially and has run into all these financial problems, that his life has not meant anything. And the whole
Right.
the whole third act of this movie is to show that your life is more than what you build or spend or buy. It's about who you are as a person.
Absolutely. And I mean, this also kind of feeds into this idea of populism. Traditional populist film highlights the corruption in pop culture and its never ending pursuit to overcome the inherent good in people. And the populist hero prevails over the corruption, but doesn't get rid of it. I think that is especially what happens here with George Bailey. Because you're right, it's a morality tale, right? It's about the morals of the main character, and if he can overcome the corruption and greed of the establishment. And especially during Christmas, you're absolutely right that we have such a financial bend to Christmas. It's looked on for its finances. People are more generous during this time, but also you buy presents for each other, and so you are kind of forced as American society, at least America, you're kind of forced to look at it as how much do I have, how much are these people worth, how much am I willing to spend?
Yeah.
And so I think that is one of the reasons, just like you said, why this movie kind of resonates with this Christmas feeling is because at the end of the day, the money doesn't matter. What matters is who he is as a person.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can look, if we're going to do real talk here, and being a little bit vulnerable, I struggle with my finances a lot and it gives me a lot of stress. And I haven't been necessarily in George Bailey's situation with losing 8,000, but I've been negative 800 in the hole. And I know that that just puts so much pressure as a person because your value to pop culture is tied to how much you have. That's
Mm-hmm.
just kind of how it is. I
Yeah.
hate money, but that's how the world works. If we could have a Star Trek society where the amount of money is based on merit, sheesh, let's go. Jake, you and I are freaking billionaires. But so I think that's why another reason why this resonates so much is because this is reassuring people that it's not all about the money. Um, the other thing that populism talks about, and we're going to get into Clarence here with this, is the key characteristic of populist filmmaking is including a wise and trustworthy Cracker Barrel Yankee philosopher. Now, guess who came up with Cracker Barrel Yankee philosopher? That's right, Dr. Wes Gehring. But
The legend.
I think, it's Clarence is this quirky character that, I mean, really doesn't, he's kind of like the guide, but he really
Mm-hmm.
doesn't do much, but he is quirky. And I think that Cracker Barrel Yankee philosopher
Yeah.
kind of comes into play here. Not necessarily straight Cracker Barrel Yankee philosopher, but I mean, he even has Mark Twain, which is like the most populist thing I can ever think of.
Oh yeah, and
You
it's
know,
like it's so inherently American. I mean, I think populism is an inherently American thing. It was started at the turn of the 20th century as a political movement to fight back against era of um, big business and greed and corruption and
communism, right?
whatnot.
Too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, communism it kind of
It's
precedes
that's different.
communism. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think populism in a way like globally kind of develops into communism. But this is not economics. This is the Cinefile where we talk about movies. Um,
Right.
but
And I just said I'm terrible with economics apparently. Anyway,
but no, I think Clarence very much is. You kind of have these characters that tend to um, they're able to cut through the fray of your issues or your circumstances so simply. You know, Clarence can look at things so simply and explains George's life so simply, and George keeps being like, "No, you don't understand. You don't understand." And when it's that George is the one that doesn't understand, because Clarence, you think of him in an angelic sense, he comes from another realm. He comes from heaven, however you want to describe it, but he comes from something that is bigger than George Bailey's earthly problems. He is able to take that large, wide view and see that losing this 8,000 is not all that significant when it compares to George Bailey's character and who he is as a
Right.
person, and the countless number of people George has helped in Bedford Falls throughout his life, and even just by extension, like by saving his brother Harry, and then Harry goes on to all his war heroics and everything, and then Harry saves a bunch of people. So it's like without George, and that's kind of the whole point of the third act, is showing that like you really have made an immense impact on so many different people. You don't always realize it. And I think also that's a very populist thing, is to try and be like, you don't see the big picture, and so you need that character like a Clarence, to be able to cut through the um cut through the weeds, if you will, in the mundane, and be like, you got to see the big picture. So no, I think
Yeah.
Clarence is very apt in that role.
I mean, because the third act of this movie has echoes of A Christmas Carol, specifically, in this idea of what if I was never born? And Clarence is just this unique character. And I always think it's really interesting. And I'm going to butcher this story, but my mom told me a story once about my dad. After my parents got divorced, my mom and dad would still talk pretty frequently. And dad would go to AA meetings. My dad was an alcoholic, and he would go to AA meetings. And there was this time where he was at an AA meeting, and he was really feeling like really down, because he was also depressive. So he was feeling really, really down. And he sat next to somebody that never came ever again. And it was his only time. And he sat down next to this guy, and this guy said, I can't remember what he said, but he cheered him up. He cheered him up enough to say, hey, like, you have good qualities. You don't need to succumb to this idea that you're not worth anything.
Yeah.
And he told my mom after that, he said, that was my Clarence. And that to me, I don't know, it just shows the power of this movie.
Mm-hmm.
This idea, because this is idealistic in a way, but it's also something that I think we all need to realize, is that there is a bigger picture. We are not the sum of our circumstances. We are more than that. Mm-hmm. And we get so bogged down in the weeds, especially during Christmas. So you have this populist film that comes in here, and some of the other things, it's adherence to traditional populist sentiment, like Cracker Barrel Yankee philosopher setting in a small town Americana, which Bedford Falls very much is that. The importance of second chances, an idealistic hero, and those kind of ideas are almost timeless.
Yeah,
that's what we aspire to be. And especially at Christmas, where we're so reflective of our past year and what we're doing and the finances of it and things like that. I mean, it just really, because I just wanted to look at it on this watch, because I know the story of it. It's absolutely, I mean, this movie's so good. It's so good. And it's crazy that this movie had a budget of $3.7 million. What is made in 1946. And it only made 3.3, which means that it didn't make its budget. And 3.7 million at that time was a decent amount of money. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't critically popular. And this movie, just like Wizard of Oz and a lot of older films that you may associate with a holiday or may associate with more popular culture, people know about them, all have to do with the fact that it was syndicated. Essentially, when it ran its course, and I think what was Paramount had the distribution rights, or I don't exactly know the whole story when it comes to this, but the idea was that it was able to be syndicated, it was able to be shown on television, and so they would show this year after year. And so this movie itself also, I think, idealizes, or just the circumstances around this are very, very populist in that this
Huh.
movie necessarily in the pantheon of movies, this isn't like the greatest movie ever made,
Correct.
but it's the story it tells and the morals and the lessons it tries to give its audience have resonated more than the greatest film ever made
Right.
in a
Yeah.
way. And so it endures.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of populist idea is what we also see here in the film proper.
Right.
And so it's just such an interesting idea because
Yeah.
this is so unconventionally, it's not a Christmas film, but it is a Christmas film,
Yeah.
and it should be watched at Christmas.
Yeah. And I guess just to kind of, you know, building off what you said about, it's the movie itself is kind of a representation of populism, and that, it's how it resonates with audiences. I guess to kind of put a bow on this conversation is that I feel like populist films more than others per se have a call to action for the audience, right? You watch it
Yeah, they
and
do.
it inspires you to really a successful populist film. It shows you the good in everyday people around you, and then encourages you to go show that good to other people, right? It encourages you not to be the George Bailey. Well, it encourages you if you feel like George Bailey, but it also encourages you to then go be a Clarence to someone, right? Go
Yeah.
be that guy that your dad met at the AA meeting that was able to have a positive impact, even just for a brief moment. This one snippet of his life. It empowers you, I guess you could say, to go into the world and be that Clarence, be that positive light, be the reason that someone is able to, be kind of shaken out of their mundane drudgery and depression of every day, and see that there is hope, that they are good, and that there are good people around them. So I think really this is just like almost the purest populist film that exists in a way.
I think so. The other one that kind of comes to mind is also another Jimmy Stewart vehicle, which is Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And then Henry Fonda in what is that? Young Abraham Lincoln?
Young Mr. Lincoln.
Young Mr.
uh
Lincoln, which I know you like.
yes.
It's
Directed
good.
by
It's
John Ford. John Ford takes a
right.
very different approach to populism than Frank Capra does.
Yeah, Frank Capra is like the
Yeah.
Steven Spielberg of populism.
It's it's funny you talk about a paper for Dr. West. I wrote a paper on populism for Dr. West, but looking at Fordian populism, if you will, kind of Ford's
This one
mid
was
to
about
late
the
30s.
judge. The
Interesting.
greatest movie, yeah, the greatest movie to make out.
Ugh.
Other better than Good Will Hunting. Anyway, that's a story for another time. Uh,
Ah,
but I mentioned Jimmy Stewart because this is very much a Jimmy Stewart film.
oh yeah,
This was one of the first that he made, or maybe the first after the war.
yeah. It is the
And
first.
yeah, and at times I think Cary Grant was associated with this film, but Lionel Barrymore was like, Jimmy, you need to do this.
Yeah,
Like, you need to do this film. And he and Donna Reed and I think Frank Capra have all said that this is the best film they've ever made. They think that this film is the best one they ever made because it has such a strong message. But what was interesting to me reading about it is that what really scared Jimmy Stewart was the phone kissing scene.
yeah. Which
It
is
isn't that interesting?
yeah. It's weird because it's like I don't know what would. I mean, this is a decorated war hero. I mean, a lot of the Hollywood stars went to war during World War II as kind of,
Yeah, John Wayne
public.
punched Hitler.
John Wayne actually didn't enlist or get drafted, and that's a whole nother story for another time. Um, but a lot of Hollywood at the time, the Hollywood leading men went to war, and as kind of a lot of them, it was kind of a publicity stunt. But there's a few that were like, and I don't mean to say that they didn't serve, they didn't do their duty to their country, and they didn't have valor. But there are some that like saw real combat. One of them being Jimmy Stewart. He was a bomber pilot. He flew
That's
bomber
wild.
missions. He flew something I read like 20 missions um over Europe as a B-17. He might have not been a pilot, but he was in the precursor to the Air Force, the Army Air Corps, and
What a
then was
dog.
in
What an
the Air
absolute
Force.
unit.
Was in the Air Force Reserve and retired as a brigadier general. Was the highest ranking Hollywood star to come there that served during World War II. So, yeah, you think a guy that flew bombing missions over Nazi Germany is scared of a telephone kiss.
Well, and I think, but it's so I can't imagine anybody else in this role because
Yeah.
Jimmy Stewart is very, very good at having this um genuine kind of, gosh darn folksy
Hmm.
kind of attitude
Yeah.
that I don't know if it's just the way in which he speak, Lisa, or like Mary, what do you want, Mary? I'll Brent, when he
You want
talks
the
like
moon,
that,
Mary?
you want the moon,
Say the
Mary?
word, I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Yeah. Um, and then she hides in the bush. That he said, now this is
That
he
was
said,
very
now this is
interesting.
maybe I'll sell tickets.
He's
But
so funny in this.
yeah, he's so funny in it, but I think he just how the audience viewed him, how he was viewed in Hollywood, even though yes, he was this brigadier general, he also just had this genuine
Oh yeah.
uh thing about him that I think actually like Cary Grant, I don't think would have made as good a George Bailey because I think he would have been um too serious and in a different kind of way.
Yeah.
So I think Jimmy Stewart. I mean, he's so good in this.
Yeah. Jimmy Stewart has this very like what we would liken to it like a Tom Hanks kind of quality. He has that kind of
Yeah, yeah,
reputation. So I think it's really interesting to look at those two actors. And I think he's also such a powerful actor. Jimmy Stewart is such a powerful actor in that like looking at the telephone kiss scene, so much of what he's saying isn't what he's actually saying, if you catch my drift. Like
yeah,
he's going on and on about like what he doesn't want in his future, but really it's such a like a really angry and like upsetting kind of performance, but in reality he's telling Mary how much he loves her
yeah.
without ever
What a
saying that he
what a
loves
unit!
her.
What a
But it's like
unit!
he's able to craft this performance so well that like you inherently understand that. Like it almost has like a foreign film quality in that you don't need to listen to the words to know what
What's
is
going on?
what is actually being said.
Yeah,
Um and so I
and I
think
think
that's such a neat juxtaposition.
yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right, and especially because the scene where he's kind of drunk after his brother's basically like, yeah, like I ain't coming back to the building alone,
I
peace
got
out.
married.
Yeah, I got married. And he goes and he calls upon Mary, is
Yeah.
what they would say back in the day. You could tell something was off,
Yeah.
right? But it's incredible because you watch it and you're like, that is not a mean-spirited guy.
Yeah.
He's just having a bad day.
Yeah.
Which is just incredible because any other performer, you'd be like, wait, I could actually see him actually being an asshole in real life. And Jimmy Stewart's just not that. He's
Right.
just not that. But yeah, the fact that he does this, he goes, because he says, I don't want to ever get married. I want to go and travel the world. And that's almost his inner monologue coming out of him saying, I don't want to do these things, but this is what my heart is saying. My heart is saying that Mary's the gal for me, all shucks,
Yeah.
right? And that I do really care about this whole town and all these people, and my destiny or what I'm supposed to do with my life is here. It's not out in Africa. It's not out in the Yukon. It's here. And so he's having this argument almost with himself and how he's feeling as to how he's thinking, but he's saying it out loud and he's holding her. And I mean, it's just such a compelling scene.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, how many times have we thought, this is what I want to do with my life,
Right.
right? Or I'd love to go and do that. I'd love to go and do that. And when it doesn't pan out, we get kind of pissy, right?
Yeah.
We get pissed off. And then we realize we needed to be here.
Mm-hmm.
We needed to be here for this reason. That's why that didn't work out, is because this needed to happen. And I think that kind of mentality is something that I know I need to focus on a lot. Because if my situation isn't ideal, what am I doing? And I got to think of the bigger picture, right? Populism. Think of the
Yeah.
bigger picture. Think outside of myself and what it means for other people, what it means for everybody but myself. So before, I know you have some anecdotes,
Yeah.
but I want to make sure this is clear. I think I know the answer to this on your end. You did watch the black and white version of this, correct?
Yeah, because the other one's blasphemy.
Thank you. That's all I needed to say because that's absolutely correct. Yeah, you don't. The, I now do I find the colorization of black and white film fascinating? Yes, but also, especially costumes, makeup, the look, it all was designed because it was black and white. So the
Hmm.
way it looked on black and white, maybe they had like a really outrageous orange
Yeah.
that looked a certain color. And so that's why things look the way they do. But when you transfer that to color, it looks weird and some of the meaning is
Hmm.
lost. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
make sure, as much as I would find it fascinating to watch some older films in black and white transferred and kind of digitally altered into color, I think that'd be really interesting. The correct way to watch this is the black and white version.
Yeah,
Anyway, end of
because
rant.
well, even to just kind of look at it from a production standpoint, like there is extensive like camera testing for different wardrobes and costumes and how different lighting techniques. And you're gonna make decisions based on, like you said, based on how it's gonna look in black and white. That's the footage you're testing. So then to like go and do it in color is just gonna be like is just not gonna be intended. It's gonna have a different look than what the filmmakers intended.
Right.
And um, this is the classic nerd in me. This is the filmmaker in me, but I want to watch it how the filmmaker intended for it to look.
Correct. Anyway,
Um,
I just that needed to be said.
yes, it did. Um, speaking of how things look, it kind of is an interesting segue. The snow in some of these scenes, they actually invented a new kind of fake snow because
Yes.
this is wild when I read this. Before really this movie, if you had like if you wanted like big snowflakes in a scene, they painted cornflakes white.
They quite literally had frosted flakes.
Yeah, they just dropped them. But the reason they didn't do it for this one is Capra wanted to do the dialogue live. He didn't want to have to do a bunch of extensive redubbing, and
Which is
so
a good idea. Yeah.
yeah. Um, but that meant they couldn't have a bunch of cornflakes falling all around because then when George Bailey is running through the town, instead of Merry Christmas, everybody, it's Merry Crunch, 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 Christmas, Crunch, 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 because he's chomping through frosted flakes like he's Tony the Tiger.
Oh my lord. No, that's a movie. Uh, Tony the
What if
Tiger.
Tony the Tiger came and saved George Bailey instead of Clarence?
Well, and also when this was made, there was like a massive heat wave in California.
Yeah, they shot it in July.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
shot this in like so it's made it was Liberty Pictures is the production company, but it's distributed by RKO, and they filmed on the RKO radio lots. And like this is quite, to your point about the budget was pretty significant for the time. They built a lot of Bedford Falls. Like there's not a lot of like things getting reused per se that I could find. It's like the town square, like they built it. Um, it's actually it's rather on the nose, but it's inspired by Seneca Falls, New York. I read. They have like
Yes.
a similar like Main Street, how it's got that divide that median in the middle. Um, it's very similar, apparently, and so that's kind of one of the telling things that you could, and plus the fact that it's got falls in the name. But yeah, so I mean, it was they shot it was on a soundstage, but also like on location in a way because like they built this town.
Kind of
But
like
yeah,
Back to the Future. I mean,
yeah,
they built the main square in Back to the Future.
yeah.
Like Hill Valley. I think it's still around too.
Is
I
it?
could be wrong. Maybe. but it was because Michael J. Fox had to film basically everything at night. They had to make it day, but
Huh.
that's a different movie. We're not talking about Back to the Future. Um, we're talking about, I guess, Back to the Present. like,
Yeah.
uh, but I mean, even there are some scenes. There's specifically a scene, and it actually works with George's mania because he feels like he's in this kind of he's kind of crazy, right? Because
Mhm.
oh, like it's Nick's now. It's not martinis and all this.
Yeah.
There are a couple of scenes where you could see he's clearly sweating,
Oh yeah.
and that's because of the heat wave. But I think it actually worked out really well because that just showed the extent to his kind of anguish and worry and anxiety. But it's actually just because it was super hot out.
Yeah. It's funny how uh the little details that are unintentional kind of work out in films. Um,
Oh yeah,
there was a bit of ad-libbing in this film, which is kind
really?
of yeah. The probably the most notable ad-lib is you talked about when George is leaving Harry's party after coming home and he's married now. Um, and he's going to be leaving Bedford Falls.
What a he freaking finessed everybody. I mean, what a what a
Yeah,
freaking fact to drop on people.
yeah,
Like, hi, I'm home after 4 years. Also, I'm married. Just
yeah.
like, and you never
But
told us
he never said he was married. He's like, yeah, this is
this is my
Mrs.
wife.
Bailey. This is Mrs. Bailey. And then wait a minute, Mrs. Bailey. Why don't you tell a guy?
I found our real mom. The other one's an imposter.
That's a whole nother movie.
Yeah, that's a whole
Um,
nother Parent
but
Trap.
when when George is standing outside the party and Uncle Billy's leaving and Uncle Billy is, I mean, drunker than drunk.
Yeah,
He hands him his hat and he's, which one? The middle one.
yeah, that's great.
Um, he Uncle Billy, played by Thomas Mitchell. He starts singing a drunken song. Who does that sound like? And this walks off screen, and there's a big crash. So apparently, it was like a production assistant was carrying a tray of props and like tripped and dropped this like metal tray, and they kept the cameras rolling, and Thomas Mitchell was in the moment enough to be like, I'm all right, I'm okay. And you see Jimmy Stewart start laughing because it's genuine there because that wasn't scripted. There's just the big crash and Thomas Mitchell just didn't miss a beat, which I think there's so many good performers in this cast, and I think you can really tell that they were at the top of their game. I mean, even though this is Jimmy Stewart's first film back after World War II, like he really didn't miss a beat. Like he's as good as he ever was in this movie.
I definitely noticed because the sound that it made did not fit. I was like, what would he have run into?
I always
Like
kind of took
the
it as a trash can.
yeah, but that's like I just like the amount of noise just did not make sense for the supposed action. So that's fascinating, but also hilarious.
This movie, it's interesting. This movie goes through a number of different phases, and I think that's just a tribute to how well the story is crafted and how well Frank Capra directed it, and also how good a performance it is by Jimmy Stewart. Because young, I say young, when it's he's in his 20s, and it's Harry's graduation from high school, and we talked about the scene when Mary loses her robe and ends up in a bush. Like he's got a lot of really good comedic timing there, and it's very
Yes, he
funny.
really does.
Um, and then even like kind of the scene when it's the party, when it's Harry's going away party, or not going away, his marriage party, wedding celebration after the fact, whatever you want to call it.
Dang,
Um,
marriage. I want to go to a marriage party. That's what
the,
I'm gonna
the
call my reception. I'm gonna be like, and the marriage party is gonna be.
it's really what it is. But like there's he's comedic there, but then like we talked about, we get into the phone kiss, and like there's a level of seriousness there. It's almost like we can see George Bailey mature there. He's a more serious adult. And then we see kind of through the middle act of this movie, like George is very serious. He's got, all these problems like with the run on the bank or the run on the building and loan at on Black Thursday when the stock market crashed.
What an elite
Um,
day to get married.
yeah,
What an
really.
absolute
Um,
that'd be wild.
and you see him get more serious, through the middle part of the movie, and then to see how very serious he is in at the end of the movie in the third act, but then how his whole the gift that Clarence gives him to be able to see what a world without George Bailey would be like. I mean, obviously shakes him out. What I'm trying to say is this goes through a lot of changes, which makes sense with how much time this movie covers. I mean, we cover, I mean,
Decades.
yeah, I mean, 20 some years.
Yeah.
And, you know, Jimmy Stewart is the same age through the whole time, but he's able through his performance to transform himself from a young man into a more seasoned middle-aged man.
And more
Um,
cynical.
yeah, you really see that natural progression. I think that's just a tribute to his performance there.
I agree. I agree. Now's the time that we are going to go into some Rosebud and Thorn. Jake, as always, I'm passing it off to you. What are your Rosebud and Thorn for It's a Wonderful Life?
So, shocker of shockers, Jimmy Stewart is going to get a rose.
Duh.
Um, this is just
Absolute duh.
we've gone on and on about it, and I could continue to go on and on about how much I love Jimmy Stewart in this movie. I mean, it is his movie. He excels so well. He has a lot of great players around him, which I'll get into with my other roses, but it really is his movie. If we don't have a character we care about, we sympathize for, we worry about really in George Bailey, if we don't have a believable performance there that really draws the audience in, this movie is worthless. It's just fluff at that point. So I'm going to definitely have to give a rose to Jimmy Stewart. Also, the direction by Frank Capra. I think this is probably, looking at Capra's filmography, one of his best crafted stories. I think one of his most obviously endearing stories. But I think it's kind of Capra at the top of his game as well. So it's really interesting seeing your lead actor or actress and your director kind of when they're both at their peak. That intersection, I think, really creates some special movies, and I think this is an example of one of them. Donna Reed, we've talked a little bit about Donna Reed. I think her portrayal as Mary, I noticed it more this time than other rewatches. Maybe it's because I was looking for it more and trying to be more analytical and more critical of it. But I really enjoyed Donna Reed's performance. It's so easily could have been a throwaway character in a way, and not going through a similar kind of maturation along with George Bailey. But I think she brings it as well, and she's
I agree.
able to in the scenes where it's just them two. I think she's able to stand up to a very a very, I don't want to say forceful, but a very imposing performance by Jimmy Stewart. It's a very it draws a lot of attention, but she doesn't let the moment outshine her performance, I think, when you really look at it. So I want to give a rose to her. Lionel Barrymore as Mr. Potter. I mean, he is very two-dimensional. I'll be honest with you. That's how villains in populist films kind of tend to be. They tend to
Right.
be very, I mean, you think of things like the Wicked Witch of the West and Henry F. Potter and corrupt lawmen in or lawmakers, I should say lawmen
And Mr. Smith
in
goes Washington.
yeah. You think of these very kind of two-dimensional, that's kind of a staple of the genre, and I think it's a big beef people have with the genre, and that's valid. But I think if you're looking for a populist villain, I think Henry F. Potter, played by
Oh,
Lionel
yeah.
Barrymore, is like chef's kiss. He is just sentimental hogwash. The tone of voice, his demeanor is just it's all there. So I like him. Um, who else? Thomas Mitchell and Ward Bond. I'm also going to give roses to. Uh, Ward Bond plays Bert the cop, and Thomas Mitchell plays Uncle Billy. Um, I noticed, uh, at least with Uncle Billy, I noticed there was a little more meat than I remembered on that performance. There was a little more substance to it, which, yes, he's a drunken fool, but I
Yeah,
feel
but
like,
that's just Thomas Mitchell.
yes, like he's known
Like
for
he
playing
plays that
that.
all the time.
Yeah, it's very, he plays Yeah, he plays the doctor in the
in
drunken doctor
Stagecoach.
in Stagecoach. Similar in a number of ways to Uncle Billy, shockingly. But I think he really excels here and is able to add a different element, right? I don't feel like we ever have characters that overlap in their purpose. I feel like every character is kind of crafted in a way that is they each bring something new. And then I'm a big Ward Bond fan. I like Ward Bond. Uh, did a number of movies with John Wayne and John Ford, notorious drinking buddies as well. But I think I enjoy with I always laugh when they go to the old mansion after the run on the building and loan, and it's Ward Bond and
Ernie.
Ernie, thank you. I couldn't remember Ernie's name. And they're putting up the all the different signs and everything, the posters in the windows of all these exotic locales. And I don't know, Bert's just very funny in that scene.
Mhm.
So maybe that's a little sentimental for me, but I'm going to give Rose to Ward Bond too. I think I do have a but.
Okay.
I do have a but, and it's going to be the screenplay. There are times, and this is a very populist thing. There are times where I'm like, this is too on the nose. It's too like I wanted it to be a little more believable. It's very.
Okay.
I was very aware that it was a movie, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
It felt like too like orchestrated how perfectly things fall together, in which I'm sure people who have seen a number of the episodes are like, this is very weird because I like things that fall together. But it's like this it was too like the bow was too neat.
Yes.
It very much became like we go from George is about to commit suicide to everything is peachy and keen with George's life. You know what I mean? And it's just like it's too neat of a bow for me. As much as I love the ending, I told you every time I watch this, I cry. I cry. I mean, I'm getting emotional thinking about it. But when Harry proposes this toast to my kid brother George, the richest man in town, like that's such a powerful moment. That is the perfect payoff for this whole movie. Um, and it makes me
Now,
it
folks,
makes,
the cameraman in me wants to do it just a slow pan in to Jake as he's kind of tearing up. Right. That's one of the things. I think it was Tim Pollard, and I'm a little sidetracked, but he said something about when we were doing documentary shooting. He said you want to zoom in on those moments, and he's like, get him to cry and kind of zoom in a little bit. And he's like, he didn't say chef's kiss, so that wasn't like a meme at the time. And also is Tim Pollard. But um I so like when Jake was like, the richest man in town, like I just wanted to just control the zoom. Uh but no, I mean you're absolutely right. I don't remember what you said.
the screenplay is too on the nose. I
Oh
also
yeah, 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 that's right.
I
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
I also
it
think
is, and
it's
that is very populist.
I
Yeah.
think it's also perhaps a touch long. I can't tell you where it's too long, but there's a point in the movie when I'm like it drags. I think it's in the second act. I feel like we lose some progress a little. So I think that's another issue I have with the screenplay. Also, we're not consistent with our use of an external narrator, an omniscient narrator.
Okay.
Like I feel like it needed to be more consistent because there are times that I forget that Clarence and Joseph and whoever the third guy up there is. Um,
God.
is it supposed to be God?
I think so. Maybe. I
Okay.
don't know.
Um,
Somebody that isn't angel second class. That's clowning.
that's funny.
He said
Um,
AS2. He goes, now what's AS2? It's angel second class.
but I feel like it's very heavy in the beginning, and that but we need it, and I enjoy the fact that we use it to skip through time, but I feel like it could have been more consistent. So I guess this my one bud is the screenplay, but I have a few different issues with it, and that's why I'm listing it as a bud. But then of course no thorns, no
Yeah.
thorns.
Yeah. For I mean, I'm pretty much on the same page with you. I think Jimmy Stewart obviously gets a rose. I think this is a tour de force performance. It really highlights his strengths. I think him and Capra together, other than maybe Stewart and Hitchcock, uh, him and Capra do real good work together.
Yeah.
And so I think they just utilized his skill set, his strengths very, very well in this. Frank Capra as a director producer. He also did screenwriting for this. I think his take on populism was acute. So I think it was just really well done here. It's just a classic. I mean, this is the definition of a populist film. I like that a lot. Donna Reed and what's his face? Billy. What's his name?
Thomas Mitchell.
Thomas Mitchell. Uh, both Donna Reed and Thomas Mitchell also get roses. You're right. Like when you remember this movie, you just remember Jimmy Stewart. Maybe you remember the concept of Clarence, but you don't really think about Mary or you don't think about Billy. And both Mitchell and Reed, I think, do really good jobs of supporting Jimmy Stewart in his performance and really giving him something to kind of chew on and to act alongside. So I think those are very, very good as well. For Buds, I agree with you as well. I said as well like so many times right there. I have an issue with the screenplay. I do think I think that I like the concept. I wanted to see more of, you know, life without George Bailey.
Hmm.
I feel like they really rushed that.
Hmm.
And so I think where you're feeling the length in the second act is especially for somebody that has seen it before. You know what is eventually going to happen, but you're like, you could just feel like there's not enough time left. Like you can kind of feel the flow of the movie. You're like, there's not enough time for them to really dig into what it's like if he's not there. And I think that, you know, because obviously we see the good deeds of George Bailey in the first 2/3 of this movie, and then the last act is really seeing what happens when he's not there. But I think there's some stuff to be mined with him not being there, and I mean, and really kind of emphasizing these are the reasons why. Yeah. Because yeah, obviously his kid brother dies if he's not there, but we kind of get an idea of what happens to his mother after that happens. But it's, you know, I kind of wanted to see some more meat there. So in the screenplay, I get it. It's on the nose. That doesn't necessarily bother me, but I feel like we could have gotten more from that third act and maybe make it a little bit more half and half. I I guess I didn't notice it, but when you said it, the lack of a consistent omniscient narrator is something that I think I also wanted as well. I mean, to really say, hey, this is because that every time that happens, it reminds the audience that there's a purpose to this, that you need to focus on certain things for the third act. A lot of times when you have a director or a cinematographer, like they will, it's called the idea of Chekhov's gun, right? It's shown in the first act, it goes off in the third act. So sometimes cinematographers will do that. Will have the Chekhov's gun. They'll show something like the Zuzu's pedals. But when you have an omniscient narrator that can also kind of clue in to say, like, keep and remember, because he does that. He says, remember this for later. You know, I think that really would have kind of sold the narrative a little bit more, even though I have very, very minimal issues with this film. I think it's fantastic. And no thorns. Now is the time that we're going to go into who we think we are. For me, this was pretty easy, but Jake, I'm going to pass it off to you as I do every week. Who do you think I am?
I think you're George Bailey.
Yeah, I'm damn straight. I'm George.
Like it's you kind of touched on it earlier, but it's like you're very. I feel like we have a lot of conversations where I have to play Clarence a lot, and I think it's a normal thing for everyone to go through. There are times that I need you to play Clarence for me a lot, but it's like you need that person to like be able to be outside your circumstances and be like, look at the big picture. Like it's not so bad. It feels bad right now, but it's not going to be so bad. Um,
Yeah,
I also just know how much you love Jimmy Stewart.
I really
Um,
do.
and like
Dude's a freaking
you're
OG.
I know you like his sense of humor in this and like his witty lines I know you'd appreciate. And so it's like you are no one else but George.
I his stuff with Mary at the beginning, like I want that. Not like that, those exact
You mean the
circumstances.
moon? You want the moon?
No, but I mean, like, it's clear that they both are very attracted to each other, and that's so much fun.
No.
That's like fun. Like when, you know, it, like even if you're like acting in a scene, when it's clear that you're supposed to be like really attracted to the other person and vice versa, that's so much fun to play off of. And so I really appreciate that. But yeah, I think for better or worse, I'm George Bailey. I think both the kind of optimism, but also uh, not being satisfied where he's at, and not really necessarily always seeing how people value him. I think that is very much me. You kind of mentioned it. I went back and forth between Uncle Billy and Clarence. I see you as Uncle Billy because you because Stagecoach was the first movie that was John Wayne's big break, and Thomas Mitchell, I always think of Stagecoach when I see him. And then I think of John Wayne. That's how my brain works. I'm just like, hello. But I think you very much have like the heart of a Clarence of being able to play Angel's Advocate, not Devil's Advocate.
Angels
Um,
advocate. We need more angels advocates.
yeah. Especially with me as the George Bailey. But I mean, there are times where you're a bit of a George Bailey as well. But I mean, I I'm quick to jump the ledge. Sometimes when it comes to different things and being like, all right, this is an absolute disaster, and you're like, hang on, chill out a little bit. So now that we've done that, we're gonna go into some final thoughts. Jake, what are your final thoughts on It's a Wonderful Life?
Final thoughts is I think just the best way to sum it up is like, look, is this a perfect movie? No. Like we pointed out, we both have buts. I have issues with the screenplay. You have some similar issues. And so is this a perfect movie? No. But I feel like the impact that this movie has, the message it has, and how important I feel like it is can overcome any, technical or artistic flaws. And I think this is a perfect example of that kind of movie. It is a very significant film, um, both in, the lexicon of Christmas movies, in the catalog of film history, in especially populism, but just for people in general. Like people need to see this movie. And whether it's how closely it's tied to Christmas, we got into that conversation. I think when you really dig in, like this is able to connect with the audience in a lot of ways that the emotions of this season, similar to kind of what we talked about last week with Elf. I feel like it's very aware of the what your average audience member, the baggage they bring into this movie. And I think that's just a testament to um, how well this movie is made.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I went into this kind of thinking, okay, we're doing this Christmas classic series. This movie is not overtly Christmas oriented. So I wanted to say, okay, why does it work? And you're absolutely right. This is a morality tale. This is with issues and themes that come up during the holiday season, and a great message about how your worth is not tied to your finances. Your worth is tied to who you are. And that can be anything from the circumstances around you to the way you view the world. And that's something that really resonates during the holiday season. I think it gives great performances. It's clearly populist, but in such a cynical world nowadays, it's nice to watch a populist film and be like, okay, even though it may be overt, it may be on the nose, this is something that is possible
Mhm.
when you see the good in people. The shows the good in people, and So you're right. There are some flaws to this, but it overall is a great movie. Do not be dissuaded by the fact that it's in black and white, but also watch it in black and white. If you watch it in color, you are a heathen. Um, and I also think, just kind of to wrap a bow on our all of our conversation, as the resident George Bailey of the two of us, I also think, whether it's Christmas season or not, it's really important that you let people know their value. Words of affirmation is my number one love language, but it's not a lot of people's. And I think that sometimes has to do with society and how awkward that can be. But you see the power of that in this film. And while it may be a little tongue in cheek, it really does help to say, hey, like, I see you're on hard times. Here's some money for food. Or, hey, like, you did this, that you helped me and you changed my life in that way. Those kind of conversations, while they may be a little uncomfortable because they're emotional, are very, very important. And I think we see that in this film. Yeah. But the real question is for you folks at home. Have you seen It's a Wonderful Life? Is this on your Christmas watch list? Have you never heard of it? Which, what world do you live in if you've never heard of it? Let us know your thoughts, your review, your thoughts on populism down in the comments down below. If you like this video, hit that like button and ring that bell with the subscribe button to get all notifications on upcoming content. We are done for the year, but we will be back in February. Make sure to follow us all on social media, both Jake and myself and the Cinefile. You see the links right there. For Jake Biller, I'm Ben Sparrow. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. Thanks for being a part of season 2. We'll see you back here for season 3 in February. Until then, cut.